First, I want to say thank Dr. Wolin and Dr. Herman for being here today and taking time out of the day to teach us about um, communication skills and the kind of misinformation around vaccinations and how we can help fight that. So, Dr. Wolin, you may have seen on TikTok, Twitter, maybe on the cover of People magazine, but he is the CEO of Kids Plus Pediatrics in Pittsburgh, and then Dr. Chad Herman is their communication director. He's an award-winning writer, editor, and filmmaker, so we're pretty lucky to have them speaking today. So for those of you coming in, just mute yourselves and we'll kind of continue with the presentation.
Okay, ready to go?
Go ahead.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having us. We are thrilled and thankful again, someone for the invite. And yeah, we're really just thrilled to be able to present for you guys down there. So we're just going to have at it. Let's go. All right. So first and foremost, again, we're up here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So and we are thrilled to be talking about this topic that's near and dear to our hearts. I'm going to start with this slide. And this is a slide that we added in actually after the American Academy of Pediatrics meeting, where Paul Offit pointed out that if you pick one word that has been, unfortunately, what Chad would probably tell you, the demise of good communication that we saw repeatedly through the pandemic, it was the use of the word breakthrough. So if you think back to vaccination rates for COVID right now and some of the biggest brouhaha, and yes, there was myocarditis and things like that. But if you look at one of the root words that I think people can point to, and Chad can absolutely jump in here and riff, is this was not the appropriate word to use because this was never the expectation. The expectation was that the vaccination would prevent severe disease. But unfortunately, Chad, I think that definition came in like, I don't know, 2/3 of the way into where we are now.
Yeah. And you know, Todd, sort of, I could take over the entire presentation now and talk for the next 3 weeks.
I'll see you guys later.
Yeah. About how, obviously there were failures at every level throughout the pandemic, but I would argue, and if I had the time and a couple of research assistants, I would go ahead and write a book on it, that the single greatest failure at every level, local, state, federal, throughout the pandemic, was a failure in communication. And of course, part of that comes from managing expectations. Part of that comes from just simply not being forthright. Some of that comes from not in any way being clear and transparent and honest, particularly when there were changes, which of course, social media likes to see as flip-flops. I always say science could never get elected to public office because it flip-flops when evidence changes, but we don't explain that well enough. And one of the many failures, to get back onto the point here, is indeed the use of and the allowing this term to kind of take on a life of its own is the breakthrough infections. And then again, the failure to communicate, to clearly explain what that means and why that wasn't anywhere near the problem that the anti-vaccine community and the vaccine deniers would have you believe.
So with all that in mind, let's tell you a little bit more about vaccination communication. And let's start first with talking about pediatrics. So if I had to sum up pediatrics, I would tell you that I think this is what most people think about pediatrics, right? You either come in for your shots or you get measured or you get forms completed, or you come in with symptoms and we decide, do you need a prescription or need to go to the ER? And I think people boil it down to that. And I think when you do that, you are missing the special sauce. And Chad now will tell you about the special sauce and how it's actually the antidote to some of what we're seeing right now. Let's tell you a bit first about Kids Plus. That is our practice here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have something called the Breastfeeding Center of Pittsburgh, which is a regional resource, and the Well, which is a community gathering space, which is inside of each of our 3 offices, which doesn't work so well during pandemics because you don't want to bring a lot of people together. But what it does work well is it doubles it as a mass vaccination room, which is a large scale room which we use. So our offices are in Pittsburgh are north. That's our newest office up in Cranberry. We have an office right near downtown in Squirrel Hill and one south of the city. So we're a practice. We're not owned by a hospital. We have about 110 employees and about 20 providers. And we are known for our quality, our connectedness, and our communication. And Chad, I'll let you take this away.
Sure. So I am thrilled to say that I was the first full-time communication director employed by a pediatric practice in the country. We do a lot of work with the AAP at the national level, so we know that is indeed, we were sort of historic in that way, and I can take no credit for it. It was not my idea, though I did fill the position, obviously. And now there are several dozen of me nationwide, which is kind of a terrifying thought. But when the physician owners at Kids Plus hired me, they said, Chad, one day we're going to build you a video studio. And I had no doubt that they meant it, because these are women and men of their word. But they're a pediatric practice. I mean, come on, who are we kidding? What pediatric practice actually builds a video studio? Well, Kids Plus does. We did. I'm sitting in it now in my kind of booth. The actual production facility that you can see there is right through the glass window here, because we understood way back then, when I was first hired in 2010, that while good communication was important everywhere, video was going to be particularly important, because there's some really good data that says that people would much rather watch 2 minutes of video than read 2 minutes of text, particularly, obviously, online on their phones. And so we wanted to be able to communicate to our patients, to our families, to our community. And of course, the cool thing is you can communicate to globally at the same time. And we knew that video was the way to do it. And so what you're seeing here is a video studio. It is a podcast studio. We dubbed it Evidence-Based Studios for what we hope for this audience is obvious reasons. And everything that we do comes out of this space. It's a huge part of the way we communicate, and particularly the way we communicate about vaccines, which is sort of where our story and where our work in the last 5 years begins. You want to go ahead and bounce this? Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So back in August of 2017, we made a public service announcement. It was a 90-second video on the HPV vaccine as cancer prevention. We titled it "We Prevent Cancer." And we shamelessly stole the visual concept from the NFL, who about 6 months earlier had done anti-domestic violence PSAs. You may have seen them. They ran a lot during the playoffs and the Super Bowl. And the idea was they took NFL players, put them against a very simple white background, had them all deliver the same message, cut them together so there were multiple players giving the same message, and then aired it, again, nationally on all sorts of media channels. And the theory there was, we're going to take people who are respected, who are looked up to by our target audience, and have them deliver a very powerful message in a very simple and kind of moving and direct language. Because, as we all know, there are very few people. Nurses are number one, and we'll talk about this later. And healthcare providers, your own particular healthcare provider with whom you have a trusted relationship. There are a few people who are more trusted in that to give messages and to give information. So we chose every single provider who was in our practice at the time. They all appear at least once, most of them 2 or 3 times in the span of that 90-second video, which Todd and I wrote and we produced and we shot all in-house. And again, what we did was we took tested language, tested arguments, things that we knew from in the exam room, from talking to parents, one-on-one, caregivers, grandparents, things that we knew moved the needle in getting them to move from hesitancy about the HPV vaccine to being willing to get the vaccine. And so we had all of our providers do it. We posted it online, and it was a raging success. The AAP, the CDC, the American Cancer Society loved it. Most importantly, it had the intended effect. We were getting messages on social media. We were getting calls in the office from parents saying, I want to get this vaccine for my child. How do I get it? Next well visit. Can I make an appointment? And we were feeling really very good about ourselves.
Yep, that was 15,000 views in.
Yep, about 15,000 views in. And then about 3.5 weeks later, which if you know anything about social media, you know is an eternity, we went from 15,000 views to 105,000 views. And we also went to a coordinated global attack on our practice because that video was dropped inside an anti-vaccine group on Facebook and then dropped inside another private anti-vaccine group on Facebook, both of which were about 50,000 persons strong. They are both much higher now, because again, this was 5 years ago. And we were the second such attack of this kind, and they continue apace today, more than 5 years later. This is a brand new phenomenon. Everyone who has ever been on social media and has ever spoken about vaccines or posted or tweeted about them has seen some sort of anti-vaccine blowback. But this was something entirely different. This was, again, a global, coordinated attack. We were attacked 24 hours a day for about 8 consecutive days, completely around the clock, because there are always people awake all around the globe. And the thinking is that if people are, it's like the old Field of Dreams line, if you build it, they will come. Well, if you post it about vaccines, they will come. And if you post it well enough, they will come in large numbers, in hordes. And again, this was a coordinated attack. Literally, we were getting screenshots from inside the anti-vaccine Facebook groups. There are actual moles. There are spies who go undercover inside the group. It's all very 70s spy thriller espionage. And they were coordinating their attacks. So get their Yelp reviews, get their Google reviews, call their office and flood their phone lines, all because we had the audacity to advocate for evidence-based medicine and science for the HPV vaccine online. What Todd has put up here, this slide is a real quick kind of overview of the strength of the attack. And it kind of built and built over the weekend. Monday was a tremendous day. It was the 4th day of the attack. It was by far the largest. And we have a theory that the attack would have continued and gone even longer and stronger were it not for some reinforcements that we had. People saw what was happening to our practice. Todd was at the National AAP at the time. He was spreading the word. An amazing, amazing group that we didn't even know existed before that day. Physician Moms Group. I'm guessing some of you out there know about them and probably are even members of them. They go by PMG. They messaged us and said, can we unleash the mighty power of PMG to help you? And this is a group tens of thousands strong of physicians who are also moms, as their name suggests, who collaborate online, and they came to our defense. And what we learned that day, and it launched a large part of what we do, what we've done for the last 5 years, is that one, we were the first victims of this scale of attack. We knew they were going to happen again, and we wanted to be able to prepare for it, to help physicians, to help practices, hospitals, whole health systems who were going to suffer these kinds of attacks. We wanted to be able to prepare them for what was coming. And we also learned on this day, on this Monday, that anti-vaccine bullies, like all bullies, begin to lose interest in punching people when they start to get punched back.
So, yeah. And what I would say with that is they were being punched back with both data and explicatives. So I don't want to sound too militaristic, but healthcare social media sites are soft targets. They aren't particularly prepared to be attacked. They don't know what to do when they're attacked. And as Chad said, we were looking with screenshots and descriptions from the inside, showing them digitally high-fiving as they were leaving us fraudulent reviews, as they were attacking us. And mind you that this little chart that you're looking at is the representation of number of accounts that we're attacking. Some of these accounts were posting over 100 times per day. The total number of attacking posts was over 10,000 posts just in this 6-day span. So Chad would literally put in 16-hour days, wake up, and be thousands of posts behind. The
whole point here is shock and awe, right? They want to overwhelm you. They want to make you feel scared. They want to make you feel beaten down. And their goal, their ultimate goal, is to get you to remove that post, to take down your vaccine advocacy online. And it's really easy. If you do that, all of the trouble goes away. The attack stops. It's victorious. They move on to the next victim. But if you do that, and if other practices in hospitals and whole health systems, and we have heard from whole health systems that even during the height of flu season, because of just the very specter of these attacks, they were told, their communication teams were issued a directive, do not post about vaccines. because we don't want to suffer this kind of attack. When that happens, when pro-science, evidence-based medicine voices are silenced, there creates a vacuum. And guess who fills that vacuum? The anti-vaccine forces.
And to Chad's point, you see where the reinforcements came, but I also put up the social media reviews, because there's two things that are involved in these attacks. There's the disinformation, which is totally juiced by the algorithms. The more sensational, the more wild, the more it's spread. Nobody's going to really share like 4 million people were vaccinated this week and nobody got hurt. That's not sexy. It's not wild. But if you say government's in bed with pharma, that's in bed with docs, and they're all giving cancer or there's snake venom in vaccines, man, that's going to blow up and be there for weeks to months. So that's one piece, is disinformation being spread. The second, which we really want to highlight, is the attack against vaccine advocates and vaccination advocates, which this is what this was, right? So this is a second phenomenon. It's not disinformation. It's actually attacks on people that are willing to stand up and say things about vaccines and vaccination. And the reason I put these up is, as Chad said, we were seeing screenshots from inside basically saying, here's their Yelp review site, here's their Google review site. We bring this up because Yelp lives and dies, as Chad likes to say, by the authenticity of the reviews. They are a review site. They actually have a vigilante protocol in place. They put a banner up. They said suspicious activity, and they removed every fraudulent review, including the few 5-star protective fraudulent reviews, got those down and got them out. And we were like, fine, just get all fraudulent reviews out. That was great. Google, though, we put up here for a specific reason. And Chad, I know we're trying to keep on time, but I'm going to let Chad tell you this story because you kind of need to hear this, because you can't call or email Google.
Yeah. And you have to understand, again, as Todd said, what they're doing is they're going after your reviews. And by going after your reviews, they're trying to go after your livelihood. Mm-hmm. And the idea is, obviously, if you are looking, someone tells you to look for a pediatric practice, you're going to check them out on Google. And if you do that, you're going to see their reviews. Literally in the span of 4 days, our aggregate reviews at all 3 of our offices went from about 4.8 out of 5 to 0.8 out of 5. When you're seeing star reviews in fractions, you're not going to investigate that practice. If you're out of town and you're looking for a taco place somewhere and you see 2 taco stands near you, one is 4.4 and one is 0.8, you're not going to investigate and see if the 0.8 had fraudulent reviews. You're just going to go to the 4.4 one. And we talked to lots of practices over the last 5 years, including some who, when they had this sort of attack and could not defend themselves and get those fraudulent reviews taken down, saw year over year new patient volume decrease by as much as 25% at a time when birth rates were up in their regions. We saw this time and time again. This is an absolute attack on the practice, again, trying to terrorize you into silence. So the Google thing, we had dozens and dozens and dozens of fraudulent reviews. You can't call Google. You can't email Google. You can't text Google. You can only appeal the reviews online. Here's something a lot of people don't know. You, as the owner of your individual practice or of your individual provider page on Google, you have no more ability to report fraudulent reviews than Todd or I do for you. If you own your page, which Google tells you is standard best practice, you simply cannot report that there's been a fraudulent review against you. You can post offensive or you can or threats, but a fraudulent review, even though the number one term of Google's reviews is that they must not misrepresent your relationship with the business or the provider that you are reviewing. We had reviews from Australia, from England, from the West Coast of the US, places that are an awful long distance to come when your child has an ear infection. But we were getting these, and so we appealed them. I appealed them all. Nothing. Oh, then 1 or 2 would disappear. Then I found a back door. The only way to communicate with Google is to send a direct Twitter message to @GoogleMyBiz, their Twitter account.
That's as long as Twitter's still around.
As long as Twitter exists. And to tell them. And I spent months sending them screen caps, showing them the fraudulent reviews and explaining how and why they were fraudulent. It didn't take much explanation, by the way. And after a couple of months, they just stopped responding to me. And there were still dozens of fraudulent reviews, including ones from Australia and England, still on our page. And then In the midst of a resurgence of measles, The Guardian decided to do a story on online vaccine hesitancy, heard about our story, did a story on us. And in it, when they heard that Google was not taking down our fraudulent reviews, made that one of the centerpieces of the article. And so after 344 days of silence from Google about our fraudulent reviews, one day, literally one day after the Guardian article appeared, all of the remaining fraudulent reviews, one of which was screen capped in the Guardian article, suddenly vanished. So when people ask us how to clean their Google reviews, the joking answer is, well, just wait for a global resurgence of measles and then wait for an international media outlet to write an article about you, and then Google will take down all your fraudulent reviews. But the real story is you have to find these backdoor ways to get in and to talk to them. And we have spent tirelessly the last 5 years trying to get this to be changed. Because again, anyone out there who advocates for vaccines is open to an attack, and is open to this kind of an attack that can directly affect the bottom line of your practice, of your own personal practice, of your hospital or your health system.
So there's definitely two components. Again, there's the disinformation and then there's the attack. And the social media platforms are currently protected by like section 230 of like the decency law or something. That is an issue. And I want you as future voters and people to recognize that they need to be held accountable, because right now they're shielded by saying we're just a platform. We don't create the content. If they become liable, they're much more likely to then police their content. And right now, clickbait, false sensational content, makes them billions of dollars. So that's one thing. They're making money. And so now when they put a little CDC or WHO warning, well, this is vaccine related, you might want to check this out, I clap and say that's like the arsonist throwing a cup of water on the fire that they started. So Renee DiResta, who we talked to, said the one thing you guys should do is shame companies that aren't doing it. So I'm just here to say Google sucks. Okay, so let's keep going. We have one of the things we decided to do was really create an awareness campaign. So we have been covered in a lot of places, including peer-reviewed publications. We've had a couple articles out in the journal Vaccine. We wrote a commentary in Nature Immunology. We've been in 3 documentaries. We've been on the cover of the LA Times, the cover of the New York Times Science Times, and a lot of places trying to get the word out that there needs to be a call to action, not just to hold them accountable and let you guys know that they're weaponizing the review systems of social media platforms, but what's our role? And we'll talk about that. Again, this is us this is actually the photo they used for the cover of the LA Times, but they also reused this in another publication. And in spite of being New York Times, LA Times, peer-reviewed publications, your aunt and your grandma doesn't get excited until you make it onto People. We did give Ricky Martin, I think, the cover on this one. So we took page 77. And as you can see, this is now 5 years down the road since the attack. Our work hasn't stopped, but it basically just transformed or evolved into fighting COVID disinformation and COVID vaccine disinformation. So let's talk about the special sauce again. Let's go back and talk about what you as a pediatric provider have. And ultimately, as Chad referenced, trust is a key, and he mentioned that mostly with nurses, that year upon year are surveyed as the most trusted profession. Physicians are not far behind, and if you break physicians out by subspecialty or specialty, pediatricians are right up there with nurses, followed by Sith Lord, and followed then by member of Congress. So I did steal that joke from Mark Del Monte, who's the CEO of the AAP, so I have to give him credit. But the key here is that healthcare providers possess immense trust, but we squander it all the time. And something else I want you to know is that the trust isn't with the healthcare system. You can be proud of your healthcare system, whether it's Texas Tech, whether it's Kaiser or Mayo, but the trust doesn't really reside there. It resides with the provider, or at least with the practice, which is why Chad made such a point of showing you that in our PSA, he made certain that each provider had some FaceTime on that video. So people go, hey, that's Terry, my nurse practitioner. Hey, that's Dr. Pi, my doc. So that's key. So it's not the insurer nor the system where the trust lies. It's the provider, at least at the practice level. And that's because pediatrics really builds what's called, and what I call longitudinal trust. We see patients for a decade or two. If they have siblings, you may see them for more than 2 decades. If you are a little older in my generation, you're seeing them for 2+ decades. If you're seeing them as Dr. Pai, who's still working, who helped form our practice in the 70s, he's seeing kids of kids of kids. And sometimes right there, all you have to say is, I'd recommend this, and people would do it. That trust is amazingly important. But the problem is that we aren't reaching everybody every day, right, in the office. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm going to tell you that your main job is this. It's behavior change, right? Think about it. You want people to do more of some of these or less of some of these. And if they do more of well visits and compliance with, a variety of these things, or switch more to a plant-based diet, or if they lock and store firearms more effectively, they will be safer. If they don't vape, if they don't juul, if they aren't getting sunburns right, where we know that behaviors drive health. And yet, how effective are we at communication? Are you prepared? No, you're not prepared, right? You're absolutely not prepared. I've been through residency. I've been through medical school. They don't teach us, and they still don't teach communication in any strong form. And that's problematic, because this is what you're taught. Okay. Scream out the diagnosis. If I was there in the lecture hall or in the auditorium with you, I'd be saying, does this ring a bell? I might throw in this one, hypertension. And I'll be certain to tell you that several people will scream out pheochromocytoma. Okay. Yes, this is a neuroendocrine tumor with an incidence of around 2 to 8 per million. You will likely never see one again after you get out of residency, but they will be damn sure this is on every board question or every board that you take. And I get it. Everybody gets their little slice of turf, and everybody's fighting for their renal diagnosis and their renal carcinoma and their neuroendocrine carcinoma. And I got nothing against neuroendocrinologists or neuroendocrine tumors aren't things, but I got nothing against neuroendocrinology. The problem is we teach this to the point where you can answer this on your boards, but you can't talk about things that are common, like sleep or breastfeeding or communication or good vaccine background. So this is a problem. And I'm here to be provocative, but it's a problem because our current structure for health education and medical education, from the school level all the way through residencies and all the way through attendingship, and that can include respiratory therapy school and pharmacy school and nursing school, we all have the ability to have an impact here. And yet we aren't being leveraged. And we all have trust as medical professionals, particularly primary caregivers that have longitudinal trust, but it's not being leveraged, and it's not being taught in a way. And it's not being taught at all, actually. So let's take you right into the two healthcare communication fallacies. So the first one, and this is you inside the exam room looking out, 365 days a year, your patients are out there, right? And the first healthcare communication fallacy is that you can only impart your wisdom to your patients when they're inside the room. And let's be real, that is just unreasonable thinking. First off, patients only in the first year of life come into your office about 6-7 times per year, and then in the second year it's less than that, and then after that it's even less often. So the notion that you can only communicate things while face to face is crazy. And the other thing is, this is what Gen Y and Gen Z use for everything. So if you aren't communicating here, as Chad likes to say, you aren't in their world. You aren't relevant. And the other thing is, for the few times they are in your office, they may be late for their next appointment. The sibling may be crying. The parent may not even want to talk about whatever the topic is, immunizations or something else. So how is it that you can communicate what they want? Here, because Gen Z, Gen Y, and I would even say X's and boomers now want their information when they want it, where they want it. And that very often might be in a bathroom. It might be on a couch while breastfeeding a baby. Let's be real. That's where people get their information. And this notion of you have to come to us to get the information is not reasonable. So there we go. So the second one is that you will be believed. You may be trusted, but if they are reached with this information first, they may not believe that whatever you're saying is appropriate, that vaping and juuling really isn't that dangerous, or the vaccines, I don't know that I want to get them. So the whole point of all this is, if you remember the adage, if a tree falls in the wood, does anybody hear it if nobody's around? My argument would be, if you have great information but aren't delivering it in a powerful way, are people actually getting it? The great news is, in 2020 and 2021 and 2022, there's this kind of cool medium called social media. It's actually the most powerful communication tool we've ever known. And yet healthcare is the last and largest sector of the economy that hasn't figured out how to use it. Everybody else is using it. Now, let's say you're evidence-based and you're a hat maker, and you go out and you do some data, and you see in 2008, that 10% of people liked red hats, but by 2021, blue hats is making up 79% of your target population. And mind you, this wasn't subdivided by people of childbearing age. So this is social media profiles. And my argument would be that people of childbearing age and the ones that are having kids right now are probably like 99% on a device like this. And this is where they get their information. I made this slide just so you could see what 1 hour of a year's time looks like. And to be frank, that wedge is too big. You couldn't really see what an hour would look like. And you don't even get an hour of face-to-face time. But the whole point here is that shouldn't be the only way you reach people. I hear you that it's really powerful when you're face-to-face, but there's not that much time. There's a lot of other hours where people are getting information from a lot of other sources. And these companies know it. They know it, and they know that this is a tool for behavior change. They change behaviors. They can get you to take a cruise, order a package, get your double pump mocha latte for $12 by nudging you and staying connected to you on social media. They change behavior, so much so that while they spend collectively hundreds of billions of dollars, ROI stands for return on investment, which means for every dollar they spend, they actually get more than $1 back. They make a profit. And yet here we are in healthcare trying to figure out, how do I get people to use car seats? And how do I get them not to vape and juul? And how do I get them to come in for their well visits? It's like, well, you could be here, or you could just know what a pheochromocytoma is, because maybe that'll help you more. So, Chad, I'll let you take this in.
In the traditional media, of course, the line was always, if it bleeds, it leads, right? If it's scary, if there's anybody who watches local news still to this day, if there's a gunshot, if there's a house on fire, if a car crashes into a building, they are there. It's live and late breaking. On social media, that gets turned into, if it scares, it shares. And Todd loves to say this. He coined it. We love it. We go with it.
I quoted myself.
He's one step away from Michael Scott. He's quoting himself. So if it scares, it shares. And Todd mentioned earlier, right? And we've seen really, really good research on this. And it's depressing. Good news, good safety information, good positive evidence-based information shows up, has a bit of a spike, lasts about a day or two, and then drops off, never to be seen again on social media sites. Scary things, conspiracy theories, things that sound really terrifying, that might have a slight scintilla of a hint of truth, but are complete BS, but they get a lot of clicks and get a lot of people worried, stay spiked for days, 2 weeks, 2 months, then might drop off, but then will come back. I call them zombie myths. There are things that just never die. Once they're out there in the ether, they can't be killed. The good news just disappears. It's like candy floss. The bad news, the scary stuff, it just keeps coming back.
Chad, did you know that the HPV vaccine can sterilize kids?
I did know that. And I also knew that when I got my COVID vaccine, I can now talk to Bill Gates simply by tapping on my arm and saying, hi, Bill. Hi, Bill.
Yeah, it can sterilize you too. They also, I mean, it's like Chad said, it just never goes away.
They never, ever, ever go away.
By the way, that was sarcasm. It doesn't sterilize kids. Just.
But I can talk to, but no, I can't.
Yeah. So to our point, all right, this whole notion of leveraging social media can be used for bad. And you guys know this. And now you see these things all popping up, right? And the way you do it is you mix, or you can scale it up to do these kind of things. And you mix disinformation by using fear and hate and distrust. And you can see that was done. And this is pushed by a variety of entities. Now, this is pre-COVID kind of standard numbers that really exist both in the US and outside of the US, that 75%, 3/4 of your population is considered vaccine accepting. You make a recommendation of vaccines and they're like, yeah, go ahead and do it. Now, 23%, and I make this kind of fusiform to show that this can be very fluid and go between these different groups, are considered, now some people say hesitance accusatory and negative, and I don't disagree. You could call them questioning, you could call them whatever you want, but the point is they aren't sure and they want more information. It's only 1 or 2%, and Chad likes to talk this. I'll let him give you a little bit of how a small amount of people drive the conversation, but the point being that you have 2 ways to overcome this: face-to-face, which we don't do nearly well enough, and 24/7, 365, we are losing the virtual battle. But Chad, can you give them a little sense of how much control a small group can have using social media?
Yes. First, let me tell you that there are 3 billion people who are on Facebook, 2.5 billion on YouTube, watching 3.25 billion hours of video every day. There are 1.5 billion people on Instagram. There are 1 billion on TikTok. And I'm guessing that at least some of them live near you and might even be your patients. And so this is the very, very example of sort of thinking about how to communicate with them. If you are on social media, if you aren't here, then you only really exist to them when they're in your exam room or when they need you. But if you're here every day in some capacity, you don't have to be on every social media platform like we are, but you should, as professionals, be using your voice, your clinical voice here somehow. If you're there, then you're part of the conversation every single day. And again, as I said earlier, if you're not, it creates a vacuum. That vacuum gets filled by a very, very small percentage. Todd's got the screen up here. About 2% are anti-vax. There aren't really reliable numbers on how many of those anti-vax people are militant anti-vaccine attackers or the posters, but there's some really good data that says that the vast majority of posts are driven by a very, very small number of posters, right? So we have 75% accepting, 23% hesitant, but probably a less than 1% of that 2% are driving the conversation. If you do, and things are a little better now on Google, but a year ago, at least 2 years ago, if you did a vaccine search on Google, the vast majority of what would come up would be anti-vaccine, conspiracy theories, BS. Even on YouTube, you're actually watching an evidence-based pro-vaccine video, and in all of the recommended sidebars on the right-hand side are all anti-vaccine videos. Of course, it's built for you to click and watch something else, and all the extra ones that you will click for years and years and years, and still pretty regularly, are the anti-vaccine ones because, again, if it scares, it shares, and that's what drives revenue because they drive the clicks. An incredibly small number of people can drive all of the conversation. That's the bad news, right? The good news is, because there are an incredibly small number of people who are punching way above their weight, way above their numbers, the good news is there are way more of us than there are of them. And it's a strict numbers game. If we share their passion, and right now, I mean, we do, but not here. Most of us don't share that passion here online. If we take that asymmetry of passion and we even it out, and then we take the asymmetry of numbers, we have far greater numbers than they do, and basically flood the zone on social media, that is how we win this war.
Right. So there's like over 67,000 members of the AAP. Think about nurses, respiratory therapists, pharmacists, way more of us, but we aren't trained, we aren't supported, we aren't protected. I know we're running a little behind with power outage, so I'm going to take us through a few slides, get us cut up, but Chad and I will be around to answer questions. So who benefits from improved vaccine communication? And that's at the crux of what we're trying to say, is that's what's necessary. And I'm going to tell you, the people typically in charge of the purse strings that have to make big decisions about, well, do we really restructure our education and restructure supporting our staff to use social media? The answer is yes, because
Yes.
there's something in it for everybody. Patients will benefit. You can improve things at a population health level, which is the way insurance contracts are currently structured. You are currently being measured on large swaths. This is the way you reach large swaths. HEDIS and quality measures, and we have data in our own practice showing the more connected they are and the better you communicate, the more compliant they can be. So you will again be scored better on measures that you're trying to achieve that you can't without using a tool like this. And patient satisfaction, Chad can tell you ad nauseum how much satisfaction people get from good communication. And we hear this all the time in our practice. And finally, reputation management, which is exactly what happened after we were on the cover of the LA Times when that 9-person communication team called Chad from their hospital system, $1 billion hospital system, telling us that their CEO and CFO told them to go silent on vaccines because they're no longer just scared of bad press Ganey scores. They're worried about possible social media attacks. Who stands to gain? Every one of these entities stands to gain, including the health system, including your CFO and CEO, including every one of these entities. The only people that stand to lose are these groups, and that's okay. Now, finally, before we go into the last stretch here, I'm going to give you one quick face-to-face orientation. This is called the AMES methodology. It's not motivational interviewing. I'm going to do this in like a minute. Okay. AMES is announce, inquire, mirror, and secure. You have not been trained on how to deal with somebody that's vaccine questioning. Here's one way you can deal with it. Hey, Mrs. Jones, today Susie needs her TDAP or HPV and her meningitis. Mrs. Jones says, I don't know. I'll take the first and the last one. Not so sure about that middle one. Inquire. Mrs. Jones, you're bringing Susie in here for like 11 years. Come on. I know you guys well. Please let me know, what is it that concerns you about the HPV? Your inquiry. Mrs. Jones says, my sister-in-law posts on Facebook, it can sterilize kids. Mirror. Okay, let me just make sure I get this right, Mrs. Jones. You're saying your sister-in-law posted on Facebook that the HPV vaccination can sterilize kids. Is that right? You're mirroring her exact words back to her. You're using active listening. You haven't interrupted her. You've actually opened up an opportunity now to let her know what's worrying her. In research, communications research, they call this kind of, you allow her to kind of feel felt. You can actually figuratively move over to her side of the table and express some damn empathy and say, you know what? That scared the hell out of me if I thought that was the case. Can I tell you I got my kids vaccinated? Or can I tell you about what I know? Because the two things we lead with when we're faced with hesitancy or questioning is either data, we start talking up here about 95% confidence intervals way over their head, or the second thing is we show them scary or talk about scary things and we use fear, both of which make people that are already questioning more resistant. Finally, if she says, look, I just want the first and third vaccine, the TDAP and the meningitis, I don't want the HPV, secure the relationship. You know what, Ms. Jones, thank you so much for talking to me. I appreciate it. We'll bring it up and talk about it another time. So let's get into what the tactics are from the anti-vaccine side.
Real quick, though, Todd, I want to follow up on AMES really quickly because that is really, really great stuff. Again, that is evidence-based communication research for communicating inside the exam room. If you secure the relationship and not the vaccination, you are now sending Mrs. Jones and that child back out into the world of this for what might be a whole year until they come back for the next well visit. So if you aren't here, you've secured that relationship, but now you've sent them out to bathe, to almost literally bathe in vaccine myths and disinformation. And they don't come back for a cleaning from you for another year. If you're not here, you are always falling further behind.
So this is just going to summarize that you've already been told the disinformation campaigns basically are juiced by the algorithm and use sensational content and high volume to amplify. The second thing here is, the second piece we're talking about is the attack on vaccination advocates, harassing, threatening, and reputation harm. So when we were attacked, we knew that it was sucked to be a victim. We knew we weren't going to be the last victim. There were literally no resources available. And we knew even large systems, not just small practices, were being attacked. And so our whole story was that we launched a 4-pronged counter response. We did peer-reviewed research, which has been published. Chad single-handedly came up with a first draft of a toolkit, which was 83 pages, and it was on preparing, defending, and cleaning up after an attack. We borrowed a page out of the anti-vaccine toolbook or handbook and created our own digital international cavalry of pro-vaccine people, so that if you're being attacked, we were saying call us or email us or let us know, and we'll light the signal fires of Gondor, and the pro-vaccine riders of Rohan will come to your aid in real time to your social media site, which really worked. So even though our attack was a sample size of one, we had actually then started repeating that same thing, that if you got reinforcements quickly, you could stand by your post, not take it down, and actually come out better for it. And finally, the awareness campaign. Now, again, this is what the anti-vaxxers are trying to do. This is what we were trying to do to their efforts. And we did it by basically creating all those resources that finally came out into an initiative we called Shots Heard, which the long full name is Shots Heard Around the World. We call it Shots Heard. And basically it was to counteract all these things that you see that are going on. Now, the great news was it was working out really well. It was a needed resource. It was not available anywhere else. The problem was we're a Pittsburgh pediatric practice trying to do pediatrics. And so finally people said, well, you should keep it up. You should keep it up. So we tried to get funding. We turned it into a nonprofit, which launches March of 2020. That happened to be when something else infectious happened around the world. So we realized by the end of 2020, we don't know that we can keep doing this. We were going to wind it down, but we ended up partnering with a cool group called Public Good Projects. They actually they have a huge public health portfolio, but they already had kind of a vaccination advocacy portfolio where they had Project Vector, which is vaccine communication tracking and response, working with state level immunization coalitions, and stronger.org. Shots Heard fell into there. And then if you guys have heard of This Is Our Shot, which is also the Spanish version of Vacuna Tea, also are now under that vaccination portfolio. So it's a pretty potent nonprofit pro-vaccination portfolio. And we're proud to say that now Shots Heard resides there. Chad and I are proud co-founders. The toolkit that Chad created has been edited and now translated into not just English, but French, Portuguese, and Spanish, as has that whole website. So we strongly recommend checking out shotsheard.org. But at the end of the day, this is who we're fighting, right? It's really not the malignancies and bacteria and viruses we were trained to fight. It's this stuff. And there's ulterior motives here, right? The ulterior motives are profit, politics, and power. That's why people push disinformation. And we can use narrative and tell people about that. That's okay to use narrative, because that's exactly what the anti-vaccine movement does. And they say, oh, we're here to protect your rights or here to protect your safety, when in fact they're profiting off of it. One last thing I want to show you here regarding vaccination rates is you should be horribly depressed when you see this, because this is when vaccinations for adults for COVID came out. And this is what the vaccinations came out for adolescents, 12 to 15. And look at how those rates just kind of went up, but then plateaued at about 60%, even worse for 5 to 11-year-olds, and even worse for 6 months to up to 5. That's what the rates are. People literally are saying, I'd rather take a chance with the virus than the vaccine, because they have been literally led down the road by disinformation. And we are not doing the job we need to in terms of communication. In the last couple minutes, I leave some time for Q&A. I'm just going to tell you, this is a great article. It talks about pre-bunking, meaning if people are reached with factual information before disinformation, it actually makes them more resistant or inoculated against the disinformation. This is a Renee DiResta, who we mentioned before. She talks about how we're wired for threat. And so we actually share the information. So your granddad and grandma and aunt sharing these scary stories are actually amplifying messages, which are oftentimes disinformation. And here's an article just from a month ago or two saying, to fight the fight, we, trusted healthcare providers, through team efforts and being trained and learning how to use this information effectively, need to be on the front lines. So you've seen this slide before. To combat this, we need to be better face-to-face. That's like with AMES. And as Chad and I were talking about, you don't need a production studio. You don't even need a communications director. A damn teenager with one of these is pretty potent, and we can be. So finally, digital connectivity is where it's at. It is the behavior. And we have lost over 1 million people, but arguably unnecessarily hundreds of thousands of people that chose not to vaccinate and essentially led to their own demise because they chose disinformation over facts. So when I ask you, when you take your oath to do no harm, is that the case? And I would argue no. because we are literally abandoning people to that vacuum that Chad was talking about. Finally, I'll give a nice little pitch for this vaccination documentary that just came out. It was shown at the Vaccine Law Conference at the American Academy of Pediatric National Conference. It just showed in Pittsburgh's Carnegie Science Center to premiere, and it should be hopefully making its rounds around the country. And finally, our call to action, because I want to leave us at least 7 minutes, is I think that your trust can be leveraged by training and support and protection at the professional level, at the practice level, at the student level, and that's across all healthcare professionals. So with that, I'm sorry we had to rush through those last few slides, but I want to leave you guys some time to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you.